how to optimize the ADHD brain according to ancient philosophies, spiritual shamanic practices. So once again, welcome here at another video from Germanic Wellness, coming at you from the Germanic lowlands of how it's used to called here, the lowlands of the Netherlands, from our ancestral lineage. And that's really once again another topic of today's video, how to optimize the ADHD brain. So of course lots of people are now suddenly getting diagnosed with things like ADD, ADHD, lots of different kind of stress symptoms and nervous system breakdowns, depression, burnout and other kind of mental health challenges. Now you could say is that from a neurological modern day scientific approach, you could say that ADHD is a result of the lack of dopamine that we produce in the brain. That's why we don't feel enough stimulated throughout the day, and if things doesn't really interest us enough, we get easily distracted, lose focus, concentration, and live life like a grasshopper, always looking for a new kind of stimuli, which of course can cause problems in your work life, your relationships, and constantly binging, jumping on the next kind of dopamine impulse. Now another issue of course is that we are living currently a life of overstimulation. Think about the whole food industry. Food has been produced and created not to feed and nourish your body and mind, because the gut has a direct connection with the brain, but it's here to make you highly addictive to this larger global corporation. Then you get sick, then you get problems, both physically, mentally, emotionally, and then of course you go and see your doctor, and your doctor gives you a prescription towards more medicine, which can heal or cure the symptom, with of course loads of other kind of side effects. Now, having that part out of the way, we could easily feel that we are simply not really performing in this modern day society or culture. Now, let's take this more from a holistic health perspective, and that's really where I like to cover the topics from a spiritual, esoteric, metaphysical, shamanistic perspective, more from an integration of how our ancestors used to live, and integrate more of these type of practices in our daily modern day life. Not only that, we can heal the past, integrate the good things of our past, so we can optimize the present and we can go and conquer the future. But let's say maybe thousands of 2000 years ago, do you think that our ancestors had things like ADHD or ADD? Maybe they had, but that was like a necessity to perform well in doing specific kind of task that was necessary for their survival. Now, what kind of task are we talking about here? We are talking, of course, about being a hunter and a warrior. So, what it really refers to, like I have been mentioned this, and I'm going to keep hammering this, because I want you to understand is that we need to see this kind of like global health crisis, not only from ADD, ADHD, but also from the crisis that we see within masculinity, and this type of kind of primal energies that are supposed to thrive within us, but is like currently highly suppressed from all levels, because that's kind of like the psychological spiritual warfare that we are currently facing. But what we need to understand that to perform well as a hunter or warrior, of course we had to be highly attuned and sensitive, hyper alert to our external environment. We had to tune in to the sounds of nature, the elements of the wilderness. We had to sense, using our 5 basic senses, of what we could hear in in the bush? Like, could that be a prey or a predator? Should we run, or should we fight, or should we freeze? Now, having that into account, I think like this is really where the ADHD really were at his prime, where it was necessary to perform very, very well. But here's the thing, we as hunter-gatherers, we start to settle down to one kind of location because we figured out how to manipulate nature. We became a farmer-based society where a whole kind of town or village, and eventually that grew out to a city, was basically centered around the farm. The farmer, he sticks to one place for the whole season, the whole year, because he had to overlook his crops, to manipulate nature, to grow crops, so to feed the whole village. And from that point, of course, we caused enormous amounts of overpopulation because we didn't really have to go out and hunt anymore for our prey and food and game. But we start to grow grain, wheat. But at the same time, that was also the time where lots of people in the villages start to have a lot of infections and illness and diseases, because we stick to one place and we feed our gut with grains. Now, perhaps the grains and the wheat and the barley and the oat was of a much better quality than it is nowadays, because of course modern day farming has to be predictable. It has to be a predictable business model, so that's why the soil gets really like highly disrupted and doesn't really include much of nutrients. And of course we use a lot of pesticides, herbalizers, fertilizers, glyphosate that is coming into our diet, and that is kind of like producing chemicals in the wheat flour, call it gluten, and that is kind of like disrupting our gut health, which is of course also affecting our mental health and brain health. So coming back to the age of the hunter-gatherer, the hunter and the warrior, he was at his best of solving an instant problem, an issue, a crisis. Not only he had to be very alert to danger, but he had to respond and anticipate to the danger coming at him. So within that moment he would be like in a flow state. He would be in the zone, he would be 100% present, because he had to identify a danger or an opportunity, and he had to solve that problem very, very quickly. Once that problem was being solved, he would move back into town, he would get fed, he would get lazy, he would be comfortable. But then of course the warrior is at his best when of course he is out in battle, conquering and dominating his field. Now we live right now in kind of like a farmer-based society, where we live in overpopulated, highly dense urban environments, where we all sit kind of like together, and we don't live like the hunter-gatherers anymore, like nomads, which of course kind of has caused lots of other issues that we are simply not aware of. So basically everything we are doing or trying to do is actually completely against our true nature. That's why we feel highly disconnected, not engaged, and not associated with our daily life. That's why we constantly zone out and are seeking instant artificial stimulations in order to get alert in one way or another. So of course now the question, what can we do about it? Of course you can already say like, we are really good at procrastinating until we are falling off a cliff into an abyss of crisis, and then within that crisis we must solve the problem to get out of this type of crisis. And then we go and get out in the hunt. We go job hunting. And that's kind of really where we feel a little bit alive, because then we have to go out and look for supply and demands. We land interviews. We can go and sell ourselves. We can go and talk ourselves into a new kind of job, a new kind of role. And then we get into this new role. It's all great, exciting, something new, something stimulated. Couple of weeks, couple of months, we are in the job. We kind of know what to do. We kind of know what is expected from us. And then once again, we are fed, we are comfortable, we become lazy. Our brain doesn't produce enough dopamine. And then boredom is once again hitting us like a freight train coming at us with 150 miles an hour. And there we are in another rush to create some sort of crisis for ourselves so we can solve problems. Moving further, where exactly is this coming from? Because as mentioned within my last couple of videos, ADHD, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, another kind of name could also be like ancestral development and healing disassociation. Now, this whole kind of thing about disassociation, where this actually might be coming from. Personally, from my personal experience, I think ADHD has been highly developed within our upbringing, because within our upbringing, perhaps there were moments where we also did not feel safe and secure as a child, young boy, young girl. And then we were racing into our survival-based consciousness of either fight, flight, or freeze, okay? And then within this survival-based consciousness, we were hyper alert, we were hyperactive, because we had to react or respond to the situation. Now, there could be like a household where there are things around violence or aggression, or emotional abuse, physical abuse, sexual abuse, or emotional neglect, okay? Where we had maybe parents of addictions, or kind of parents who were completely absent, who were not there at all, broken families of divorce, or maybe a father or a mother who was not there, or maybe the father or the mother was basically passed away from a young age, and then we had to go and, you know, be independent. And then we kind of like skip the part of our developments, but always switched on, hyper alert, hypersensitive, develop a highly attuned sense of empathy, because of course, in order to feel safe and secure, we had to be able to sense the states of the other person, so we could attune to the situation, to the state of being of the other person. And then of course within the process we would of course completely neglect our own emotional needs, wants and desires. And that's why it's very difficult for us to be truly authentic, knowing exactly who we are, what do we value, what do we want, what are we thinking, what are we feeling, and our place and position in the world. That's why we are really good at being a chameleon, being highly adaptive and resilient to how our external world wants us to be, let it be in a job, a career, relationship or whatever. But through our high levels of empathy, we neglect our own needs, wants and desires, and our values and kind of like worth and self-esteem in this world. That's why so many of us are kind of struggling with issues around self-esteem and feeling empowered and somewhat confident within ourselves, still having things around insecurities. So what do we do? How to optimize the ADHD brain? Now, of course, there are like energy level management strategies that we can implement within our life to raise our energies, both on a mental, emotional, spiritual and physical well-being. I made more in-depth other videos about it. You can go and check the link in the description, go to germanicwellness.com and go and become part of our community, our tribe. But I also like to say is that we are here to learn more about this whole aspect of tuning back in this hunter-gatherer mindset and the spirits of the warrior, because that's exactly what we need right now, to go and get out on this quest of being in and becoming an heroic figure, become the hero of our own life. Not only healing our past through inner child healing, ancestral healing, soul retrieval, but also bringing more and integrate more of the qualities of our ancestors. Because we thrive probably more when we tune into our entrepreneurial and creative minds and get our creative ideas out in the world, is to solve problems and stay away from artificial comforts, because that is going to eat your soul from the inside out, which then of course eventually symptoms will pop to the surface like stress, anxiety, panic, depression, burnout, you name it. But as long as we find a way to integrate our creative ideas into our daily inspired actions, we can go and create our own identity for ourselves, is to bring that vision into a mission, into daily goals of creative expressions. So eventually we can build the kingdom or a legacy for ourselves. And for that we must go and get into this hunter mindset, into this. So now is the time and the absolute must to reawaken the primal energies that exist within us of the hunter and the warrior, in order to build the kingdom within our own heart. And then that of course can expand by building our kingdom, a legacy in our outside world. That is really the true optimization required to perform well, to utilize our abilities of having ADHD. Now, in terms of ancestral developments, I've already mentioned quite a bit about it, but just like here, like this amazing painting, like the Dutch race on the Medway in England. There's nothing that I have anything against the English or England at all, because I've been living in England for a very long time, and living there was for me the awakening as well in shamanism and all of these beautiful spiritual heritage that really lies dormant there and is really thriving in this country. But that is also symbolized for us the time of the Dutch Empire, who was at war with other European nations and empires, like the Dutch Trade War or the European Trade War, which lasted 80 years. But the Dutch, they had an admiral from here, from this local region in Vlissing. I live here in Middelburg. I can basically reach it by bicycle. But this admiral, he went out there in this enemy territory. He brought just a bunch of merchant ships, but he trained so-called sea soldiers who had to go and get out of the ships onto a little rowing boats onto the shore and go and raid the castle of Rochester in order to steal the flagship, the Royal Charles of England. The Dutch, they raised their own flag and they pulled down the English flag, and they sailed back the Royal Charles back to the Netherlands in a small town called Brielle, and they completely deconstructed the whole vessel. And then the English, they kind of like lowered their aggression with our navy battles that we used to have. And I think when it comes to ancestral developments, I think that part of this is that we could look up to that of what our ancestors used to do in order to build the life that we can currently have. But then also we can go further and we can look into the time of where paganism still existed in Europe, which of course through genocides of the Roman Church has completely slaughtered, and we lost the touch with the nature and the divine and the different kind of divine entities that these ancestors used to worship. And because these freedoms were basically robbed away from our ancestors, let it be our Germanic, Celtic, Nordic ancestors, the Germanic tribe in Germany stood up against these invasions of the Roman Empire. And the Roman Empire, they had a very tough job to fight against these so-called barbarians, these tribal people who were living in the woods. And they were losing their battles over 6 times, and then they kept coming with new troops from Rome in order to get rid of the Germanic tribes. And eventually it all started in the 11th century or before, but they couldn't reach the Baltic area because even the Baltic tribes, they really stood up against these invasions. And I think we could look back to that and learn from that, of what it is that they did, because they had the courage, they had the willpower, they had the vision, they stood up for what they believed in. And I think this is what we need right now. Of course, the average age in the Middle Ages only lasted when you were like 24 or 30 years old. But they lost their lives in war and battle and illness and disease and infections. But right now the battles we are facing, of course, are that of the financial system, the hierarchy of the corporations and the banking and the governments that really wants to oppose more laws and rules and regulations and put us into a line and where we have to be, and really where we get slaughtered with inflation and cost of living and taxes and all of that. So the financial system is currently being weaponized against mankind. But also, of course, our health and wellness through the food that we eat. And then we get distracted by mind-numbing entertainments, which of course will further distract us from our true soul calling and purpose here, what it is that we have to conquer here for ourselves. Just like with social media, there's crisis and there's opportunity. When we are a consumer, we lose ourselves in distractions and mind-numbing entertainments. When we step in the cause and purpose of the creator, the builder, we can go and create a nomadic lifestyle for ourselves. Of course, we can have some kind of base or a home when we come back home from our travels and ventures, and pilgrimages that we can go and get out in the world, but always come back to a place that we can call home. But I think that's really for us much needed for us, especially for us as men, to get back into these primal energies, and that's for us really how to optimize this ADHD brain, realizing that we might have hunter genes and the spirit of the warrior. And now we must come and revive that and get back and integrate these energies that are stored within us but has been suppressed through the mainstream and the mundane life of the illusion of comfort. Anyway, let me know your thoughts if you want to come join our community of like-minded men who have been diagnosed with ADHD, who realize I want to dedicate myself to this soul's journey and dive further into this spiritual quest, this conquer of reconnecting with the higher self and the inner self, and bring these divine archetypes that used to be worshipped, which was being seen and labeled as gods and deities, but actually it's a divine archetype that lives within us and exists within us. It's stored within our DNA. We can activate that and revive that in order to become more like a whole new human being. If that's really for you the case as well, then come and join us, and let's come and conquer our future together. Alright, see you next video. Take care for now.